it water with the sheep in the box?
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sheep Shorts, the shorter format I'm trying out in which I briefly explain my thoughts on a particular issue that I don't think is really worth spending time making a massive video essay about, but which I necessarily do feel the need to talk about. So today, we're asking the following question, which has been coming up more and more recently. That being, why are leftists always miserable as opposed to the right wing or conservatives who always seem so happy? Now, there's a number of ways we could respond to this. The main one, of course, is to simply point to conservatives and centrists to a lesser degree and simply point out that they have no reason to be upset because generally they are quite privileged people. You know, for the most part, they're cis, straight, white people, and the ones that you see prominently, like Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder or whatever, tend to be the ones who are more successful and therefore richer. The conservatives that you see in the public space are generally the people for whom the system has worked out, who it has benefited, you might say. So within this paradigm, honestly, they have less reason to be upset because, for the most part, they're not directly affected by injustice. Someone like Dave Rubin, for example, is never really going to be the victim of as much systemic oppression as, for example, someone like Dave Rubin would be if he wasn't an incredibly rich and powerful media figure. You see this with people like Blair White as well, who are more than willing to throw people like them under the bus for clout and or recognition from conservatives and the wider world. They have a survivorship bias that causes them to look at other people and decide that actually they're deficient in some way, and they overcame a lot of prejudice, therefore anyone can, right? Therefore, in general, the conservative is someone who has a deep amount of trust and faith in the system, because they benefit from it, and because, in their experience, it's perfectly possible to get ahead and succeed. Whereas becoming a leftist, for the most part, means rejecting and or becoming aware of how insidious and harmful these systems can be. In fact, becoming woke originally meant becoming aware of these systems and how they work. To be a leftist is to oppose injustice and to fight against oppressive systems. To be a conservative is to work within them and or support them. Just look at BLM or trans rights activists to see that in general people fighting against oppression and fighting for justice tend to be left-wing because they have become woke, although that's a term that's probably not a good one to be using anymore, but either way, people who are most affected by the system are the most likely to want to rebel against it. You see right-wingers constantly attacking trans people, and yet also in the same breath complaining that so many trans people are left-wing. Like, yeah, no shit. The fact of the matter is that people who are able to ignore the reality of the situation are generally going to be happier. Think of all the happy people in your life. Generally, they're people who are either disconnected from mainstream politics or they are entirely unaffected by it. Privilege does not necessarily mean happiness, however, a lack of privilege can necessitate unhappiness. Like, for example, I am a pansexual disabled man, and I don't really want to get all identity politics on you, but these intersections of my identity have led me to the left wing because I've become aware of the oppression inherent in many of the systems under which we exist due to suffering because of those identities. Specifically, my disability has caused me a lot of difficulty, and looking back on it, a lot of that is entirely due to neoliberal capitalism and the oppressions and ableism inherent therein. Speaking just for myself, all of the happy people that I know don't bother thinking about politics all that deeply, the normies, so to speak, and those that do generally benefit from it. Conservatives generally do better under conservative governments at the expense of marginalised people. Now, a lot of the time, they won't even give that a second thought. Of course, this is a generalisation, but in general, your average conservative voter isn't voting for Boris Johnson or Donald Trump or whatever because they hate the Muslims or the gays or whatever, but for a number of reasons, one of which is the fact that they benefit under such an administration. So, for example, a middle-class family in the UK may benefit from tax cuts or some of the privatization of many public services because they can afford not to have to deal with the fallout. Likewise, business owners definitely benefit from, for example, 0 hours contracts because it allows them to save a lot more money, and so on and so forth. The people saying shit like, no wonder so many people leave the left, they're all so miserable, just fundamentally don't understand. It's not a case of left-wing politics makes people miserable, it's that miserable people come over to the left because of systems that made them miserable. If you're a marginalised person on the right, then by and large, you're advocating against your own interests and potentially for your own oppression. Rightoids think this is some kind of gotcha when they say shit like this, or the meme that always goes around of all left-wing women are ugly and all right-wing women are hot talking point, which is obviously bullshit, based not only on the existence of Anne Widdecombe, but also the amount of horny people Ashley Coffin gets in her replies on Twitter. But regardless, photo montages and memes like this kind of miss the point that, yeah, no shit, attractive cishet white women have nothing to lose and are risking very little in supporting right-wing politics, at least in the short term. In fact, there's probably a lot of money to be made in doing so, but what if you're not someone who fits within society's extremely rigid norms? What if you're trans or gender non-conforming? What if you're black? What if you're fat or not traditionally attractive or disabled? In general, right-wing spaces tend to be extremely hostile to these people and certainly aren't interested in advocating for their rights. Like, how many times do you, as a trans person, have to be abused and told to kill yourself by right-wingers online and victimized by conservative policies before you become radicalized and turn to the left? Or how many times as a black person in the US do you have to watch rampant police brutality be ignored or simply supported by everyone but the left before you start to consider that maybe there's a lot of underlying reasons behind that and side with the only people actually acknowledging the problem? Yes, there are some people of minority groups on the right, but they're far from representative of a majority and in general are either well off or have beaten the odds and ended up in a position of privilege and then turned to their survivorship bias to prove that there's no such thing as systemic prejudice, because hey, if one member of a minority group can be successful, that proves it, right? The US had one black president, therefore systemic racism is not a real thing. Leftists aren't miserable because we're leftists because we have for the most part been beaten down by systems outside of our control, and we've started to realise that only one half of the political spectrum is offering any solutions or a modicum of empathy. I don't know about you, but being constantly beaten down and abused by capitalism, cursed to live in an economy that dictates my every move, whilst not deigning to allow me to own a home or earn a decent living, whilst one guy has a personal wealth of $200 billion and fuck the environment up to the point where my kids or grandkids might have to live in a Mad Max-esque post-apocalyptic wasteland simply to maximize profits, I am constantly being disadvantaged because of my disability. That has a tendency to make you pretty fucking angry and miserable. But it wasn't leftism that made me feel this way, it was neoliberal capitalism, or in other words, conservatism and neoliberalism. Likewise, it's incredibly easy for someone who doesn't acknowledge or is unaware of these issues to not have to worry about them because they're not directly affected by them. Because, to be honest, most people in society aren't necessarily affected by a lot of these systemic issues. The happy, bubbly people that you often meet in your life, like at work or whatever, tend not to be really all that into politics, because politics makes you angry and miserable because you have to acknowledge how fucked up the world is. It's easy to be happy if you don't do that. It's easy for the Lord and his court to wonder why the serfs are so fucking miserable all the time from their stately home. Couldn't be because of the system that they benefit from at their expense. Nah, it must be because they hate the Western world and want to be given everything for free. As I said, this is a complete generalization. However, in my experience, I think it's pretty clear that generally leftists are the ones who realize how fucked up the world is and how urgent it is that things get fixed before, the apocalypse happens. And that can make you pretty anxious, depressed, and yes, angry. If you don't give a shit about other people, if you're happy to watch vulnerable people fucking die, if you're happy to allow injustice to continue, then fine, you're a monster, but also you're probably not going to be the sort of person to get too upset about it existing in the first place, and likewise, if you're unaware or don't bother looking it up, that's irresponsible, and I might have a couple of criticisms of you, but again, it is easier to remain happy, because what is there to be miserable about if you don't know what the problems are? If there was a comet heading towards Earth and only a select few people knew about it, those people would probably be anxious and nervous and depressed and angry and desperate to try and convince everyone else that the comet is coming to destroy the planet and we need to do something about it now. That would not be good for your mental health. However, it's probably the correct response. Those who don't know about it, again, wouldn't give a shit and they'd not really be all that bothered in all likelihood. Likewise, there might be some who would benefit from the comet hitting the Earth. Those who, for example, have a fully stocked and prepared doomsday shelter and bunker, for example. Those who know they can survive it. Only one group of people of those three are unhappy and angry, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's legitimate to just laugh at them or mock them for caring about things. Look, at the end of the day, those who see a problem with the system and who want to do everything in their power to try and change it or to fix it are going to be unhappy and stressed and miserable because they are aware of how important it is to make sure that things improve. If you're a conservative and don't care or benefit from these systems, then yeah, no shit, you're probably not going to be that bothered. Likewise, if you're just a normie who's completely disconnected from politics, again, you can't be upset about something you're not aware of. Look, I'm just repeating myself now and I'm just rambling, so I'm just going to wrap it up. There are many criticisms one could level at mainstream leftism, but saying leftists always seem so miserable is quite frankly just not one of them, and you should find a better one. Because if being passionate about something or demanding justice is in some way a negative trait, then what does that say about conservatives who seem not to give a shit about basically anything or anyone outside of protecting the interests of the rich and powerful?
Everything I used to love has turned to shit. All the world's gone bankrupt now, and it doesn't look like things can soon improve. I'm noticeably older than I was, definitely fatter, just because I no longer feel the need to move.